you very much. So first and foremost, just to acknowledge that, yes, this is going to be fairly pacey, but that's the idea of trying to get through the volume of content where we can, and if we can, if space provides, we will probably try at least one breakout opportunity. So if you are able to turn your cameras on and your mics on, give you a chance to chat to each other. It's also lovely to see faces. So if you just want to put your camera on so we can see each other, that just makes life a bit more interactive. Otherwise, it feels like we're talking to the no person and the black screen. So my name is Kurt Lindley. I am the owner of Be More Learning and Development, and I work alongside the amazing Laura, who's to my right on my screen. So I'll just let Laura introduce herself very quickly.
Hi folks, it's so nice to see everyone, faces that I recognise, and also lots of faces that I hope will become friends over the next few days, weeks and months. Yeah, just to say that if you're joining from the UK and it's lunchtime, then obviously if you're having your drinks, snacks and things as we go, really welcome to do so. And those that are joining us from abroad, that is really lovely to have some international people on the call as well. Welcome.
Fantastic. So yeah, you'll notice that people will be joining, as they will be over the next 15 minutes or so, probably, because people are probably trying to fit this in with a number of other things. So we'll try and catch them up with what's going on. But let's get straight into the session. So hopefully when you look at the screen, you realize you're in the right place and you've read the intros appropriately. So yes, we're going to be looking at the science of learning, theory and practice. And this is all based around a model that myself and Laura created one day in my dining room, wondering why there is so much good science out there, but it was hard for us to navigate what we would trust and use. I have also started adding to the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, #dyslexic. It used to say lazy dyslexic because I found that maybe I could be a bit more in tune with the work I was doing and checking for spelling and grammar and stuff like that. But actually, I'm not lazy. I work really hard to try and make sure all those things are dealt with. But you might find during this presentation, there are some grammatical errors. And as Keith Lemon would say in his TV show, Celebrity Juice, what's the message? You'll probably see the message is more true and important than sometimes the grammar and spelling. So let's get straight into this. So we want some audience participation. So hopefully we'll start to see some things coming through in the chat function. Don't overthink what comes next, but we can see people can use the chat. So we know that that is working. So I'm going to offer you a couple of things on screen to make a decision about, and it should be really simple to write 1 or 2 words in response to it. So here's the first one. Face-to-face or online learning? Which do you prefer? Thank you, Becky, and Simon, Kelly. Blended. There we go. It's got some mix. Depends on the subject. Fantastic. On camera, online. Yes, we like a bit of both. Thank you. So there's a mix here. I'm asking this question, 1, to get a level of engagement, and 2, just to see if there is a preference either way, still in this day and age where we've been forced, probably through COVID more than anything else, to adopt an online approach. But how do we maximize it? Okay, next question. This is specifically for Laura. Learning styles or learning preferences? Which is it? David, was that your response to it? What? Thank you. So preferences, styles. Okay, we're not going to get into the debate on this call around styles and preferences. But what I would advise you to do is have a look at the research that's out there around this language of styles and preferences. It may actually be neither. It may be something that we consider in terms of one of the, I suppose, strategies that will come later, which we call dual coding. Okay, last one. All learning experiences are flawed. Agree or disagree? Slower responses, but they're coming through. Ooh, agree. Potentially, yes. Thank you, Emma. Not sure, Fiona. Okay. And Becky, Thank you. So we're getting a bit more context in. Okay, so why do I put this up here? For a long time, I was led to believe, and that might be my own fault, but I was led to believe that most of the experience I needed to create had to be perfect, to meet all people's needs. And I was introduced to this word called differentiation. And I put a lot of pressure on my shoulders to try and meet everybody's needs in front of me. And all that made me was tired and reduce my confidence in my ability to deliver. And it wasn't until meeting Laura and working with Laura that I started to understand that actually I have a responsibility to create a good experience for you. And you have a responsibility to buy into this as much as you can, given the space I create. So I'm taking some responsibility for this, but actually I have to acknowledge there are over 30 people on the call now. You'll each have a different starting point. You'll have different understandings of the language I'll be using. You'll have different appreciations for the science I'll share. And you might even have English as a second language, but you'll all see this information through your own lens slightly differently. So as much as I can create a wonderful experience, I have to acknowledge that they're flawed. That doesn't mean they're bad. I didn't use all learning is bad. Now some is, but it's not that all is bad. Okay, so where are we going with this? So some outcomes. Laura said I needed to have some outcomes, so I've created some here. This is just to give you some context. I sometimes just like to say, let's deliver some stuff and let's see where it takes us. But just for context, and again, to help you understand and be sure about where we are and if we're in the right place. What I would like to do through the next sort of 90 minutes or less now is to help you gain an understanding of the model ASRI that we've created and its application within learning, design and delivery. Less about our model, but our model is helpful, but it's more about understanding the theories. Like what are the key theories that we trust that underpin this model and how we can apply them, which should lead you to be able to start to consider some strategies that will increase that learner engagement. And sometimes that's about learner achievement or learner mastery. Okay, so what I will say is I created this slide deck and this presentation somewhat in a vacuum, which means I didn't share it with Laura until yesterday. So Laura's going to sit in the background and watch this through, and at appropriate points I'm going to draw her in. But what I'd ask Laura to do is just keep an eye on the chat if there's anything cropping up that I might need to pay attention to, because I'm not great at dual tasking. So up front, the model. I'm going to give you a quick bit of insight into this. So we didn't come up with a cool name because it got going quicker than we expected. So we had to keep it as the phrases or terms that we used in the original time. So yes, ASRI doesn't sound amazing as a name, but it has a real kind of important set of words that go with it. Attention. If we're not gaining people's attention, then they're probably not going to be able to learn what we're delivering. Sense making. If we don't give people space and time to develop an understanding through their own sense making, whatever we teach will disappear. Retention. If we don't spend some time with them trying to work out how they recall information for themselves, with us and without us, then again, it will be lost. And internalization is all about that practice. And we'll talk about deliberate practice later, but having the confidence to do that. So to us, a great learning experience, design and delivery sits on these 4 pillars. And now they're all based on what we call sound or good science, good theory. So let's start with attention. So for us, attention drops down to 2 particular key theories: motivation or self-determination theory and cognitive load theory. What we say here is not attended to, is not learned. So our job is to draw people's attention to things, but what we have to recognize is people's motivation is down to things like their desire for satisfying some basic human needs. So if we were to kind of phrase the self-determination theory or motivation into one kind of sentence, this really helps for me. The satisfaction of basic human needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And those are our key drivers for any behavior that we see. Now, I want to show you a little bit around each of the theories and then some practice. But basically, autonomy is like, what's my choices in here? Can I navigate my own path? Competence is about feeling able, getting better, personal mastery. And relatedness is, how does this relate to improving what I'm doing or my purpose or my desires? Is it going to make my life any better? Now, this slide here might be somewhat overwhelming when you see it, which plays against one of our other theories around cognitive load. So I'm going to demonstrate very quickly what we might do to make this table a bit more appealing to look at. So basically, this is from left to right, how people might consider motivation or lack of motivation to engage in any learning experience. But if I just changed it somewhat by sticking those grey boxes in there, I can draw your attention to something easier. And to say to the left of the grey boxes is where people feel helpless or they feel like a learning experience is irrelevant. So I want to draw your attention to this particular box here. Learners' thoughts. I don't need to know, or they already know this, or this is too hard. So if this is what your learners are saying, we need to start to understand, well, why do they think it's not for them? Or why is it too hard to reach? What is it that we can do about it? Now, the grey box is that bit where it's more externally driven. I'm doing it from compliance or from an external kind of point of view. And what we would love, if we could, is attach ourselves to the things on the right-hand side of those grey boxes, particularly getting people to say that bottom right box there, I'm doing this because I really love it and want to. Now, you're all on this call for various reasons. It might be because you love it and you want to, or it might be because actually one of the other ones around sort of like the value that you might get from it or the usefulness that you might think it sits within this. So let's take this to a practical stance. Oh, and by the way, as we move from left to right, dyslexia, I struggle with my left and right. So every so often I'll say left and right and I have to remind myself. As we move from left to right on this table, we are increasing the likelihood that we will attend to people's needs in terms of relatedness, autonomy, and competence. So what does this mean? So in the practical sense, I might use this to help me build better introductions to workshops. So if I'm thinking about relatedness, I might be thinking then about purpose, connection, congruence. How am I connecting with people? If I'm thinking about autonomy, I might be thinking about ownership, choice, and freedom. And if I'm thinking about competence, I might be then focusing on mastery, capability, achievement. So the intention here for relatedness is to, in my introductions, allow for belonging and connect with people's motivations. For autonomy is to allow people some level of control or choice over their journey. And for competence, it's to some degree make people feel a little bit clever, help them succeed in a space where they might need to develop and grow. So some illustrations here. If I was to tell, today we'll be covering, so I'm going straight into the thing that might be related to them. You will practice. And in terms of the ask, so instead of actually telling them what we're going to be doing, what would you like from today? And what are you expecting? And that allows me to then find out what's going on for them and actually relate the content to that. When it comes to autonomy, I might be talking about the benefits and results they'll gain from being involved in this. So again, this is the route you can take, and this is what you'll get from it. Sense of choice and control might come from that. But I also might ask, what are your challenges? And how would you like to do things? How would you like to get there? And then finally, competence. On completion, you'll be able to. So showing them the journey to actually say, well, you know, just doing this isn't enough for you. It might be that you want to know that you've got to a certain standard of mastery. Or within this group, we have a range of, which might be about showing the mastery within the group that people can learn from. If it was an ask, if I was asking the learners about their journey and what they wanted, I might say, how confident do you feel about a particular topic? How new is this to you? So that's kind of the main parts of, I suppose, attention. The next piece then is cognitive load. So already we are stretching your cognitive load. So I know some of you are going, what? We haven't had time to digest this. And that's an acknowledgement that you might need to take notes to revisit later. And what we're doing here is we're testing your working memory. So cognitive load refers to the amount of information our working memory can process at any given time. Now it's split into 3 different areas. And this might be an opportunity actually to give you a little chance to chat. So the presentation of information, how the material is displayed, and this is known as extraneous load. Topic difficulty, how complex is the task that I'm asking people to do is a load, and it's called intrinsic load. And then we have prior experience. How effortful is my thinking that I need to put into this, also known as germane load. So if those are the three things we're thinking about when we're managing the delivery of a workshop or we design of it, we need to be thinking, okay, so how am I sharing this with people? What's their starting point so that I know what to build in terms of complexity? And actually that prior experience, how good is it in terms of what they can recall from it to be able to use to go forward? So to make that effort of thinking easier, do I give them a framework for thinking? So I am going to take a risk and put you into breakout rooms. So in terms of presentation and topic difficulty and prior experience, we have on our left-hand side those three elements of that relate to cognitive load, how we process information. My question is, what can you do about it? So I want you to think about your own design and delivery, your own work that you're doing, and try and think, okay, so how is our presentation? How do we set the complexity, make it easier or more difficult? Or how do we get people to engage in what they previously know so they can build something going forward? I'm going to randomly assign you. So I'm going to give you some time to think about meeting strangers, because that also can be a bit of a cognitive demand and an emotional demand to you. So if we just think about meeting new people and being somewhat polite as we enter into a room, introduce yourself, also perhaps clarify what you believe the question to be, and start thinking about what it is that you already do. We'll give you about sort of 5 minutes to do that task, and then I'll bring you back and we'll crack on with the next layer of activities. If you still need the task explaining to you, stay in the main room and I'll try and re-explain it. But basically, how are you managing cognitive load? Presentation of information, topic difficulty, or prior experience? Okay. Rooms have been created, so allow yourself in, and I will stop sharing the screen to watch people hopefully find their way into those breakout rooms. And if you want to stay and ask any questions in terms of I've not clarified myself, then, oh, there we go. Please stay. Okay, welcome back. I think most of you are with us. I'd love to take time to listen to all the thoughts and conversations that were being had, but then we wouldn't get through the content. So I'm apologizing, but also illustrating that our job is to move forward and share more. Now, hopefully you came up with a number of things that relate to this. Our desire would be to make things feel easy to follow when it comes to presentation. So we want to reduce distraction, eliminate any redundant information. My slides continually need to be cleaned, and Laura stands in the background going, "You've over-designed this, Kurt, take something out." So I could even take more out still, and I need to acknowledge that. We need to make it accessible. So manage task difficulty. This is not about making it easy. It's about how do we increase and decrease based on the need of the people that you're working with, which is a little bit more challenging to do as a deliverer when you make one stack of slides, or when you use a kind of like a fixed asset as a learning tool. And the third piece then is about making it feel familiar. If you can connect some stuff with prior experience, it increases the task relevance, and it can, if we can see that then as adding future value, we are likely to increase the resilience somebody might have to continue with an effortful task. So moving us swiftly forward then. Sense making. So ASRI, second letter, like we're talking about, I've paid attention and I've been in your session and I'm coming in and out of attention based on my own ability to manage the cognitive load, but I need to make sense of it for it to be truly meaningful. So what we say here is what's not understood cannot be used as intended. So I can just tell you a bunch of stuff on these slides and you'll go, oh, that's great, but you need to be able to use it, as I hope you can, but also in your context. So the two theories that we lean into here are the theory of perception and schema theory. So perception then. Perception is what is an interpretation. Perception is an interpretation of what we see or sense, influenced by our past experiences. Now, this is just one quote. It's the one I like, and I've put references where I think it's important for you to get, like, if you want to find out more information. So what does this mean in terms of learning? Well, what happens often when we enter into an experience is we have a perception period, like we perceive stuff. Okay, so what does it mean for me? What does it mean for me in my world? The next stage, we're going, okay, so what's its value? If it's valuable, I'll continue with it. If it's not, I'll discard. Then there's the effort to interpret that we talked about, the cognitive load piece. If it's too hard to interpret, I'm likely to discard. So we need to make that easier. And will I ever use it? So I don't know how to change a tire on the car. because I haven't chosen to go and learn it because I'm not sure I'll ever use it because I'll just phone the AA. So it's interesting that we all learn something that we believe that we'll use. And then what really helps in this space is meaning. Okay. So how do I as a learner go about ensuring I have personal meaning? I've generated that. So some strategies you can use. This is one particular model. It's the SOI, or it's basically asking you, what are you doing with your learners to help them select? Like giving them the skills to select the most relevant information of what's being heard. Again, you're going to be on 90 minutes of me delivering quite large amounts of content in a short period of time. I need to hope that you can select what's most relevant for you. And if those skills don't exist, we need to work upon that. Then organize it, right? Order your thoughts in a way that's meaningful. It might be a mind map. It might be some form of drawing. It might be screenshotting what's on screen here, quickly printing it and annotating it, which is what I often do. And then integrate. Okay, so what does this mean in the context of what I already know? So taking that existing knowledge and adding new to it. Now, strategies that I like to use or have used to really support this include these 4. Now, there are 8 within this research paper that's there, but they're basically known as generative learning approaches. What we want to do is get people to sum up, summarize. Okay, so from what you've heard, what in your own words is this? Or self-explain, almost recount what you've gone through as an experience. It's like where you watch what's on a conveyor belt, pass through a room, and then asked to recall what did you see on the conveyor belt. You're trying to kind of like go, okay, so what was there and what does it mean? Or you could draw, you might be an illustrator, or you could teach. You could go off this call and go meet somebody else and go, okay, this is what I've learned from this experience. This is what I believe it to mean. These things help anchor the learning with you. Okay, schema theory then. Schema is an organized unit of knowledge for a subject or event, and it's also based on past experience. Again, reference at the bottom there. A little task for you all. So could you all grab a piece of paper and a pen? Something that you can draw on. Something like an A4 piece of paper if you can. And this is important if you can put your cameras on for this part of the task, or it won't work as well as I'd like it to. So here's your task. I'd like you to draw me a house. So draw the house using a pen and paper, make it large enough that you can share it via your camera. I'm going to pause for 90 seconds or so. We just need a quick drawing. When you're ready, I believe people have got that. Can you hold your picture of a house to the screen? Like I say, if you've got a blurred background, we won't see it. So it has to go against your chest and you have to kind of get up close. There we go. Now, please, everybody, try and look over the top of what you've put up there and have a look at everybody else's house. So we've got 2 floors. We've got trees outside from Fiona. Just 1 floor from Emma. Oh, Dominic's got an interesting looking shaped one. Like that. What else have we got? James has got your standard 4 windows and door. Stephanie's gone for 2 floors as well. Oh, we got 3D from Rhoda. I think that's definitely a 3D. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much for taking part of that. What are we doing? Why did I ask you to do that? Partially engagement, but also to acknowledge that the house you drew was based on schema that is within you. You have a schema for most things you've encountered. Some of you would have drawn a simple house, 1 floor, 1 window. Some might have gone for 2 floors and a larger establishment. Some might have seen a house as something that's more like mansion-like or apartment block. Some might have actually gone, well, actually, my house is on stilts. And some might have gone, well, actually, my house is in the water. So our perception of a home is based on our past experience, but it could be different to everybody else. And we have to acknowledge that when we're designing learning and creating learning. So again, it's drawing on previous experience, those schema, and building upon it. So how do we build upon it? Laura, I'm going to give you an in. Laura, would you like to explain this? And this is like I've just thrown you the ball, and you can say, no, Kurt, carry on. But this is a strategy that we can use to help build new schema, and we call it I do, we do, you do. Laura, would you like to?
No, absolutely. Let's go, and we'll navigate the slides between us, see how in tune Kurt and I are. So yeah, as mentioned, if we're trying to help people develop new schema, new sort of understandings. Quite often in roles, we are training people, we're mentoring, we're trying to get people to understand tasks. And this is a really simple model. I actually first came across it in school education. I used to work in secondary schools, and the I do, we do, you do idea is that quite often we're very good at focusing on the I do. So as an educator, as a trainer, as a mentor, manager, you are explaining how to do something. So providing direct instruction, the best ones are narrating your thought process. So you're explaining, this is what I do, this is why I do it this way, this is how I do it, this is what I'm thinking as I go through this particular task. And in the best examples, you're modeling it as you go. Could be something as simple as, this is how I go about constructing the email reply to the email that I've just received. As a learner, your task is very actively to listen, take your own notes, observe the steps, and ask for any clarification as you go. The we do, again, is quite commonly done and done well. As an educator, you're working with the learner at this stage. So you're basically saying, okay, let's do one together. I've shown you one, we'll do one together. You're providing prompts, you're using their sort of list of steps, you're clarifying any misunderstandings, maybe filling gaps in that list of notes, and the learner is completing the task with you. You're asking them a lot of questions. What would you do next? How would this work? Can you remember why we did it that way? What might you forget to do at this stage? So this is kind of that practicing point, and you might repeat this step a number of times. And then at the point at which you think they're ready, this is the key part, is the you do. It's basically saying, right, here's a safe example, and off you go. So now you have a go. And the key thing here is that you must sort of step back at this point. So let them have a go. You might be observing, but equally you might be saying, right, go away, send me this later, or I'll see you tomorrow, we'll catch up in an hour, and you're receiving the output and then providing that feedback. So only interjecting if essential, because what you want is for someone to have that moment of going, right, I'm on my own now, where do I go first? And having to really think hard. They're completing the task using those worked examples to help and receive feedback. So that's just one example of how you can really scaffold and guide people from being very reliant and in quite a novice position to being very independent. And you can repeat these steps as much as is needed.
Thank you, Laura. Loving the fact that you grabbed that opportunity. Okay, so we talk now about the next stage, retention. So we've talked about attention and sense making. Now, those things are often more in our control, and often things that we can do when we're with a learner, or even directly through the machines that they're learning from, the apparatus, the systems and stuff like that. But when it comes to these second two kind of elements of ASRI, retention and internalization, they're somewhat less in our control. So we have to sometimes make a bit of a more effortful kind of like consideration for what we do in this space. Now, when it comes to retention, we talk about what is not recalled will decay. So if we don't spend time calling upon that knowledge that's stored within us, that new stuff that we've got, it will disappear. The brain is set to default, which is to forget that things that are not useful are used. Our two theories we lean on in this area are the memory model, so specifically encoding, and forgetting or trace decay. And within that specifically, we're talking about retrieval. How does it go in and how do we take it out? That's basically what we're saying here. So if we look at the memory model and encoding, so encoding describes how information enters our memory system from our sensory input. We see some stuff, we feel some stuff, we hear some stuff, we smell some stuff, whatever it is, that appears within our memory bank, and we then process it and do something with it if we perceive it to be relevant. And that's where our work comes in again, about relevance. So you may or may not have seen models like this. I've tried to simplify this as much as possible. Again, remove the noise, as Laura was saying to me about this. So we'll see how we go. So sensory input, 5 senses, you could say: hear, smell, touch, sight, taste. They're all ways in which we receive information about whatever it is that we're learning. Now we have this selective attention situation where sensory goes, oh, what is important for us to attend to and draw to the next stage of our kind of memory processes. So what is attended to, what we decide is relevant, we pass on to the next stage, which is known as our short-term memory. Now that short-term memory, I mean, the jury's out. Often people say between 5 and 7 items. Now, sometimes the research is saying about 4 items. Basically, it's not many. And also, it doesn't hold it for a long time. Some say between 15 and 30 seconds. So we need to do something with that. And that's where working memory exists. Again, if you look at the research diagrammatically, working memory can sometimes sit inside short-term memory or sit outside. It's kind of like not fully clear about it, but we know it exists. And that working memory is the place we do the effort of thinking. To get it any further, we need to encode it. We need to go, what does this mean to me? What is important about this? Why should I recall it? And if we do that right, it goes into our long-term memory. And we see that word there, schema again. We add to existing schema or we build new schema. The key bit is what's happening here in this green circle. Between the working memory, our processing of this information, this slide deck, and how we then encode it, your own drawings of it, your own descriptions of it. If we aren't able to do something with it, it's unused or it's hard to comprehend, it's discarded. So it goes in and comes out. So it's important for you to start anchoring some of what we're sharing so you can go, okay, how relevant is this and why is it relevant? So here's our ante to the learning styles, learning preferences question I asked. It was a bit of a setup, but the idea being that if we consider things such as dual coding rather than learning styles and preferences, which is, again, the jury's out and you can go and do your research to identify what you believe in that space. But we like to lean on this idea of dual coding, which helps build visual and verbal kind of information into the working memory so it can be encoded more effectively. And what we mean by that is if we can actually use text and image that are complementary, that add value to each other, we increase the likelihood of something being processed in a positive way and remembered. Now, those images and text have to be congruent. It's no good just having a place filler as an image or a set of words that are hard to understand. Also, something to acknowledge is that something that is in text is processed in an auditory way, and that's why we have the ears there. Now, what happens is we take that information into our working memory, the bit where we're doing the effort. So we have some visual processing. What am I seeing? What does it mean? And we have some verbal processing. What do these words mean in relation to what I'm seeing? And inside our brain, we have this connection and integration. How do these connect together? Are they congruent? Do they work together? And if we get this right, the encoding occurs and new schema are created. So I know, again, this is quite a conceptual kind of drawing or diagram that might be there, but what can we do about it? Now, the bit we can do to make it work for us in terms of retention and encoding is to consider something called elaborative rehearsal. So elaborative rehearsal is a bit of a metacognition strategy, something that helps you take information and relate it in a meaningful way to existing known information. So here's just one process that might help. So question, where have I heard this information before? What do I already know? Organize. Okay, draw a picture or an image that represents that with meaning between the new and the existing information. Now explain it to another. We see that popping up a number of times as a really positive strategy for building understanding and retention. So use particular pictures to explain this to others. And then label. You might now annotate anything that's come back. So the person you explained it to might share their own reflections, their own thinking, that you can now actually create a new version of your organized thoughts. Now, this elaborative rehearsal, if you just take it as elaborate on what you've been experiencing, you're increasing the likelihood that you'll retain the information. Okay, so forgetting. This to me is like probably one of the most interesting things. To start from a point of view of forgetting. I wasn't aware, but forgetting is pretty much a default, or it's perceived to be a default process of the brain. But forgetting and trace decay talks about the fact that memories fade automatically as a function of time. If we don't revisit them, if we don't have any emotional kind of connection to them, a reason to keep them, they will kind of break down and disappear as such. So with that in mind, we've got maybe like we've got a boulder pushing up a hill. We've got an effortful task to build in. So it's really important to go back to this memory model and go, how can this serve us? So this bit, you know, the bit that I'm going to add in terms of sharing new information with you is this bit, retrieve. So what we're doing here is working on taking things from our long-term memory, the schema that's in there, and go, okay, let's draw it to mind. Let's think about it. Now, that might be triggered by an external thing, like a question, or it might be triggered by an internal feeling. But again, it's this thing that's happening here, the working memory and that retrieval, that's really, really important. Again, some real simple strategies to consider. Have to hang on accuracy. So what I'll show you next is not about assessment, but it's about understanding ways that we can check that people have accurately recalled information. So when I was revising for my exams, I would really struggle to write down all my thinking without having the answers nearby, because I was afraid of misremembering and then that anchor being with me. So I'd always have my textbooks near me so I could check everything that I recalled. And that's really important in this phase, is that accuracy. So here are some really, really cool strategies that are simple to use in terms of retrieval practice. And this is all about bringing information to mind, because it'll improve the ease, the speed, and the accuracy of recall. Think, pair, share. So think about something. Don't skip that space. So we always often give people 90 seconds to think about something before we get them to speak to a peer. But follow it with peer recall. What did you recall about today's session? What was it that stood out to you? What did it mean to you? It might be as simple as, two things. Recall two things that were most, should say, relevant. There you go, our first grammatical relevant thing after a workshop or an event. And just having those two things might be enough for you to remember more, because it will trigger thoughts that happened either side of that, or events that happened either side of that. Low stakes quizzes. So again, we're not using this for assessment, but we might have a multiple choice or just a set of questions that we ask to people to just get them thinking about something. And brain dumps, a bit like free writing. Just keep writing and writing what you think about something, what comes up, and allow yourself 5-10 minutes of freedom to just keep writing about that topic area. And then make sure that you go back and, like I say, check for accuracy. Okay, next. So internalization. This part is, I suppose, the one that we still have work to do in terms of really understanding the impact we can have as designers and deliverers. Now, in terms of internalization, what we're saying here is what is not applied does not become part of our reality. If we don't take this learning and do something with it, take it somewhere and work on it in some way, it's likely to disappear. But what we want is a self-directed learner. Now, they are few and far between. They're like gold. And we want somebody who has an ability to have reflexivity in the way they approach things. So what can we do about creating that self-directed learner is important. And then deliberate practice. And in this, we want to consider things like neuroplasticity. Okay, so I know that you might or might not have come across some of these terms before, but we'll hopefully try and explain them in a way that works for you. So a self-directed learner, somebody who's becoming aware of and manages one's own processes for learning. Like, they understand how good they are at learning and what their barriers are, what they need to do in preparation for learning, setting goals, understanding how they progress and recheck that. But key elements here about motivation, self-regulation, perseverance, adaptability, resilience. These are all things that are pertinent to that self-directed learner. We don't always meet those people, though. So we have a job to do. Now, the research that I've fallen on most now is this around learner agency. There's this one paper that I quite like at the moment, which is about promoting causal agency within that self-determined learner. And this links back to our first slides around motivation. But there are 3 elements in this. So the first element is volition action. Yes, I know I'm using words now that are beyond where maybe I wanted to take this, but there's a reason behind that. So this is about a learner having the ability to make intentional, conscious choices based on their preferences and interests. The next then is this agentic action. Okay, this is self-directing and managing actions towards a goal. And then the final one is about action control beliefs. One is probably the most relevant for me anyway, in terms of what we can do in our actions. So this is about recognizing, or the learner recognizing their own abilities and believing they will help them achieve their goals. So what's happening in this phase? Okay, so this is all about what's my goal? Like, how do I help people decide? This next one is about, okay, well, what's the plan? And helping people act. Okay, next one is, well, how do I adjust the plan from what I've learned and what I believe I'm capable of? I believe in myself. And this is my example to you about how we're working really hard, myself and Laura, to take research into one slide. So to the left-hand side is the difficult stuff we're trying to understand and comprehend. In the middle is, okay, so if we could nail this in 1 or 2 lines, what would it be? And then what's the purpose behind it? So in this paper, here's just 3 different questions or statements that the teacher has in terms of objectives here. So this about the goal and deciding is about enabling a student to identify specific strengths and instructional needs, like what do they need to move forward and what are their strengths? This next piece is around helping the students determine a plan of action to bridge the gap between their current state and the goal state that they're after. And the final one is about enabling the learner to self-evaluate towards a progress or a goal. But that's about belief. So I'm going to set you up with another task. So again, prepare yourself to be in a group with the previous strangers you were with. So there's less need for introductions, but hopefully you will be able to get some more meat in the next conversation. So promoting causal agency. How are you? I want you to think about and then talk about how you are setting meaningful challenges for your learners, how you're building confidence for them to try, and that might be about the planning, making the planning easier for them, and how you're igniting a desire to experiment. Now, you might focus on 1 or all 3 areas, but this is the thing where I'm going to give you 90 seconds now to think of your own responses to these before I put you into breakout room. So you go in prepared to speak rather than going cold like you might have done in the last breakout. So just take 90 seconds now to have a look at this slide and go, how might I set meaningful challenges? What's meaningful to them? What am I doing to build confidence to try? Because my motivation is, this is too hard for me. I can't do this. It's not for me. Or how am I believing a sense of belief because they have the ability to achieve an experiment? So I'm going to be quiet for 90 seconds. I'm going to let you have a little chat in your own mind and come up with something, and then I'll put you into breakout rooms. So if we can get to this place where we're helping people make good decisions about the thing that they're going to do, so we've set a meaningful challenge, one they want to do, and we allow them to build confidence with new knowledge or new skills, whether it's typing a letter or an email. You know, I used to teach in sixth form college, and trying to get young people to make a phone call to set up their work experience was one of the hardest things, to pick up a phone and dial and have that person at the end of the phone. So what am I doing to build confidence? So create a plan to make that call. What will you say on that call? How you engage with people on that call? Building that belief in them that they can experiment, making those calls to different employers. You know, this is really, really important. Otherwise, we've just delivered content and we hope it will land and last. So the sort of second part of internalization is all about deliberate practice. There's often we'll find within workshops and delivery and design, we start in a simulated environment, something that's relatively safe, and it's got some free play in it. So try some role play, try some activity that will start to test your appreciation of what it feels like to do something. But again, I'm from a sporting world, and I used to deliver coaching courses, and I'd ask people to coach their peers. Now, your peers often are very polite. So if you ask them to move to a particular space, they'll move to that space. If you ask them to try out an activity, they'll often try out the activity. Now, you place your peers with young children and ask them the same thing, it doesn't always happen. So that practice was more about simulation than deliberate in terms of the real environment. So when we talk about deliberate practice, it's about this highly structured activity with explicit goals, for which there's an importance there about improving performance. That's what we're trying to do. So have we structured something well enough that we understand why we're trying to, what we're trying to achieve here? Now, the principles, I suppose, that sit behind deliberate practice, these sort of 5 areas that I've kind of spotted across the reading that I've done, which is it goes beyond one's comfort zone. So it tests us beyond what we already know. It has a really well-defined goal. So why am I doing this? What's it leading to? It's intently focused on a set of activities, a practice activities. There's a high quality feedback, and the learner can respond to the feedback. So it's not done in isolation. It's not done without that. And that feedback might be actually from yourself and understanding how to have good conversations with yourself about your progress rather than how to give yourself a hard time. And it also develops these mental models around expertise. What does good look like? Do you know what good looks like in your particular field or expertise? And have you designed for that? The kind of plus bit is about this kind of, if we're doing our tasks in a real world, then we need to think about it being drawn from real life, the practice, and has some sort of performance expectations of the people that we're working with, and what we call sociological fidelity. And that's that real world experience. What does it really feel like? So me doing a presentation to my mirror feels like one thing. Me doing a presentation to you feels like something else. I start to think about how important I am in your world, and whether you're thinking about me in my background and my tone of voice or my speed of talking. There's all these things that start cropping up in my mind. I have to quieten down so I can deliver something. So most of you will have by now learned to drive a car. So to try and get that real world experience, we use this kind of car analogy to help us shift from what we might call free play to deliberate practice. And over the period of time, there's an increasing task complexity. So I remember when I first learned to drive, I was sitting on my sofa with a plate, holding it at what we call 10 to 2, hands in front. Now that was a fairly low level simulation, sitting on a sofa. But you need to be asking yourselves, in terms of whatever you're helping people kind of get better at or learn more about, what does your simulated environment look like? Can people access it? Do they feel comfortable with it? Is it a good starting point for them? And as we move beyond that, we go, okay, so what does a closed environment look like? How are you setting up a safe place to practice? Now, this could be with peers, as I said, so something where I don't mind getting it wrong. I don't have judgment because I might have not succeeded. My closed environment was a industrial estate car park, and it's a good job that that's where I was practicing, because I ended up on the pavement on numerous occasions, not knowing how to actually steer a car. At one point, my mom telling me that maybe I shouldn't drive. Then we need to add in changing conditions. So driving in the real world or on a real road with other people there. But how are you adding layers to your experience? How are you adding the complexity? How are you adding the challenges? If I take, again, a sporting context, you could be taking a penalty with no one in the crowd, an empty net. Suddenly now you've got a goalkeeper and you've got a crowd and they're chanting your name. We're adding new challenges to that situation. Then we have environmental cues, the things that we don't know will happen at any one time. They're like unknown to us. Suddenly it might start snowing or things like that. But how are we looking out for warning signs? How are we looking out for changing circumstances? How are we getting people to consider that? It could be there's a big job on, and how did you manage the idea that suddenly 2 people go off ill and you've got to manage the circumstances there? What plans have you got in place for a reduced workforce to do the same task? And then when it comes to driving a car, which I've not done yet, are you capable of towing a caravan? How will you add greater complexity to take people beyond what could be standard practice? It's that next layer where they might move to the next part of a job role or look for promotions, those sorts of things. So stacked learning is one way of looking at it. If you Google kind of free play or deliberate practice, you'll see a number of kind of descriptions around what these 2 things look like, and they're really quite helpful to start to understand how you make the shift from one place to the other. But starting with that free play is really important. So to take us back round into the kind of the cycle of this is to, I suppose, look at what we call neuroplasticity. So that's the brain's capacity to change and rewire itself in response to new learning. Now, you might have only captured 5% of what has happened on this call based on how able you are to attend to it given the time of day, how tired you're feeling, you know, how motivated you are to hold on to it, all those sorts of things. But you would have turned up with some already known knowledge in this area. And those are our kind of white dots and dark or slightly dark lines in our brain. Imagine each of those dots is a part of a memory. We don't hold memories as one unit. There are a number of units that are spaced around the brain, connected as effectively by these lines. Today, you've been exposed to new learning. So these are the black dots here. This exposure is simply me sharing some stuff with you and you engaging with your peers during the breakout room to go, okay, so what does this mean and how will I act upon it? Now, hopefully, probably when you go to sleep tonight, some of these connections will start occurring between the new information that's come in and your existing, and you start to create new patterns, new schema. When you wake up, you will have an adapted memory. That period of time between sleep and wake is called consolidation in terms of memory. That's where a lot of the work goes on your behalf while you're having some downtime effectively. It's your unconscious mind making some efforts here. Now, you might say, oh, these are really relevant. So we have what we call practice pathways strengthening. So you can see that unit of new learning has created a new model, a new schema around the science of learning. And the more that you practice it, the thicker those lines get, and the easier it is to recall stuff and bring it to mind and use it. However, if you leave this call and never revisit any of this information again and leave it to one side, you'll have what we call trace decay. So that same memory structure that's been created will start to become dotted lines and then not exist anymore. And that effectively is kind of a fairly, I suppose, accessible or simple way to describe what we're going through when it comes to learning and anchoring our learning with us. Myself and Laura created this model to help us overcome some risks associated with learning. So the next 2 or 3 slides are simply going to be saying, yes, Kurt, you've talked for 45 minutes and we've had a short time to talk with each other, but could you just give me something really simple or easy to work upon to make a greater difference? So if you remember nothing else, maybe the next 2 slides are the most important. Firstly, what are we managing or mitigating for? What challenges can ASRI kind of help you solve? So from left to right, in terms of attention, using motivation theory and cognitive load, what we're trying to do is look at the risks associated with overload, a lack of interest, distraction, because that's what we have when we're working with people. So how do we manage that risk? In terms of sense making, how do we manage the idea that we have sometimes a misunderstanding? We say one word and people interpret it different, and help people find relevance within the learning. It's meaningful to them and they can use it and track those errors in thinking. In terms of retention, poorly organized information and lack of recall. So how do we help people organize their thoughts in a way that they can revisit and utilize? And then in terms of internalization, where there's a lack of agency, a lack of self-belief, a lack of confidence, and an inability to go and practice because they haven't got a place to practice or they haven't got an idea about how to start. Right, we can do something about that using the theories that we've created there, or not created, we've drawn upon. So appreciating there might be some level of overwhelm. So this is our, I suppose, design process. So myself and Laura will often sit down and we'll go, okay, if nothing else, how can we? So these are our design questions. So you don't need to know the detailed theory. You don't need to know all the strategies that I've shared with you. But if you take even just one of these questions from these 8 design questions and work with them, you can improve the experience of your learners and increase the likelihood of good learning occurring. So in terms of attention, our questions are, how are you hooking your learners? Or how are you managing cognitive load, the volume, the complexity, the intensity? In terms of sense making, how are you ensuring personal meaning is generated? And some of this might just be through simple storytelling, what people have understood by or what experience they have had of. And in that, you can be asking, how are you checking accurate understanding from their retelling of a story, do they understand this concept well? When it comes to retention, how are you presenting information or content in a way that's memorable rather than being a busy page? What is the best way to display this so the right stuff is attended to? And also, how are you making space for forgetting? Because we appreciate the effort to make to recall stuff. Actually, there's a sweet spot. Leaving it too long, it's gone. Having it too short, it's not necessarily the deep recall we're after. So how are we making that deliberate space for repetition or retention activities? And then finally, internalization. How are we building a space for good, effective feedback? How are we ensuring that we allow a learner to feed back to themselves appropriately, but also ask other people to be involved in that feedback process? And then the final one there about internalization is, how are you ensuring valid test, retest opportunities, a place to play, a place to practice, a place to try something out? So we have, I suppose, shared with you theories, concepts, strategies, and now 8 questions that sit behind good learning design. I'm going to pass to Laura just for a moment to see if she's got anything that she wants to kind of share before I close off, and maybe have some time for some Q&A.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, Kurt mentioned at the start, the model came about because we wanted a really memorable way of having something quick reference. So, and we found this really resonated with us. I think the other thing that, certainly from my own experience, is what I heard a lot of time in the workplace was things like, I've told them this and it's not happening, or we've gone over this a million times and it's still not happening. And a lot of training and learning that I saw tended to only focus on sort of the attention, and if, you know, perhaps a bit of the sense making piece, but quite often just the attention piece. So I think the intention behind the model was to really try and think about the bits that might be less in our control, but be really intentional about the right-hand side of this grid as much as the left-hand side. And certainly some recent work that Kurt and I have done, we're working a lot more globally, whether that's on webinars or being physically invited to different countries, different cultures to present. So that sense-making piece has become even more important. You know, how are people interpreting the information that we're sharing? We know what we're saying, but how are we making enough space to actually ask enough questions to understand what somebody else is thinking, and being really mindful and aware and sensitive to those different interpretations. So I think the main focus for us has been around, you know, how do you genuinely promote behavior change, you know, the real sort of impact of learning. And that's how we ended up with this model. And I guess the reason that we share it is because we've found, like for ourselves, other people have found it helpful. So I think I was saying to Kurt at the beginning, I always say that I hope at the very least that the time that you spent with us today has been at the very least interesting, but also that you've hopefully taken away one or more things that's resonated with you, or at least made you think about something in your own environment.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, so I'm just going to put this slide here just for a moment, for no other reason other than if anybody wants to kind of track the work that we're doing. So you can scan the QR code next to the Be More kind of logo, and it will take you to the website, or you can watch some YouTube clips that I've created around this model. So there's a QR code there. So I'm only leaving that there for a moment. Scan it or screenshot it. Otherwise, get directly in touch if you want to chat more about any of these things. I'm going to stop sharing now. If anybody wants to know anything more or has any questions, the floor is open. We have time for a conversation. It'd be great to hear from anybody. And just for our egos, to make ourselves feel better, maybe you could have one word of kind of reflection in the chat function to give us a sense of how this is being received. So one word or one line, and that gives us something to kind of appreciate in terms of what people are thinking. I'm going to leave that pause in case if there's a hand raised, or put your name in the chat and we can come to you if you've got a question. Tom, maybe while people are having a think about whether they can ask a question, is there a reflection that you might have yourself that you'd like to share? Because I know that you've worked in this space previously. We did talk about your YouTube clips before we started.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's the biggest challenge I always found when trying to get stuff, I'm sure maybe some other people here feel the same way, is a lot of this information exists in little pockets. There's a little bit here and a little bit there. I think what this does really nicely actually is link it together and kind of show how one piece relates to the next. And that was the biggest thing I was kind of sitting here rapidly kind of scribbling notes away on that even I might struggle to read later, to be honest. Um, is that kind of this did a really nice job of binding those things together. Certainly, when I try and communicate it to people that I work with, this is how we need to approach this. This will make it a lot easier. We've all probably been there. We've kind of gone, oh, there's this cognitive load stuff. There's this, there's that, there's all this stuff. Now just hold all those ideas, but remember them all. That's quite challenging, right? Even if you've done this for a fair old while, having a quick kind of, oh yeah, it falls into that area. That's that's really helpful. And I say that as someone who's not a huge fan of models. Though this doesn't come with a pyramid or a quadrant, which I particularly like. That's my vendetta against pyramids and cones continues. But no, I think it's one of those things where it's just helpful. I could see immediately going, yeah, this will help. This will make doing my job easier, and we get too little of that, I think, and sometimes overlook those little things that just make life a little bit easier and the impact that can have. So no, I thought it's really fantastic. Has anyone else got any thoughts where you might use this or what it's got you thinking about? Or is it like coming up for 2:30 in the middle of the week, and in actual fact, we all
I'm
wish
gonna
it was closer to 5 o'clock?
I'm gonna be brave and start. What I do actually want, Fiona, you don't have to speak if you don't want to, but I want to come to Fiona because we wouldn't be on this call if it wasn't for Fiona. So thank you, Fiona, for creating the space that allowed us to be here. But yeah, I mean, have you got any reflections having watched this? And you can say, actually, Kurt, no, my brain is broken, or I fell asleep for 20 minutes in the middle of it, or you can just say whatever comes to mind.
Well, thank you for that little shout out. Very much appreciated. But I really did enjoy it. I am someone who needs to really like take my time letting things settle in. So I've like half written notes, which is why I had my head down a lot of the time when you were talking through. But I was just literally about to go into the chat, had typed, I really appreciate the thought and consideration you both obviously put into this. And I think someone said earlier in the chat, oh, David, you like the way you summarize like some of the huge amounts of theory that are out there, because there's so much and it's hard to know who to listen to, and also we know there's a lot of information out there. This isn't always great learning styles, so it's good to know that there's a space to come to hear the stuff that I trust you both in your own research and work. So I really appreciate how you've done that and put it into these 4 groups, but I'm still processing. Yeah, I really am. And I asked Tom just privately if I can get the slides, but he said, of course, there's the recording. So I think this is something where I need to go back and watch again and just think through my own context a little bit more, because I haven't quite got there yet right now. But I've really enjoyed it. So thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, we couldn't ask for any more than a reflection than that. I think both honest and kind of insightful. So that's kind of how we expected this to land with people. It's a lot of information. We ourselves get lost in it and have to look at each other and go, have we got lost down a rabbit hole here? You know, have we got too carried away with our own motivation to find something new and tell the world about it versus actually what's the minimum that people might need to have a more dramatic or a more kind of a purposeful impact. So yeah, like you have to work at the level that's right for you. So if it's 8 questions and only 2 of those, so when we're working with learners, we often only say pick 2. Or if it's the next layer, you know, okay, so what are the strategies or the tactics? Or if it's the next layer, what are the underlying theories? But our desire is consistently to try and make this accessible without losing the true thread between the article and the practice, because then we could just be saying anything, and that's something that's hard for us to kind of build and do. But hopefully we're, as you say, we've put effort into this, so hopefully it is working well enough for people. So thank you.
And not to take up any more time other than to say, I wonder almost if you could do 4 mini sessions on each one. That's just come into my head as you're yeah, anyway, yeah, it's been good. Thank you very much.
We'd love to. So maybe we'll keep chatting with Tom. I'm also, seeing as we've got a couple of minutes, David, have you got anything you want to share? You tend to have a perspective.
You know me so well. So there's a couple of things you said, and I think it's really important for us all on the call. So what you said, what is not recalled will decay, and what is not applied does not become part of our reality. And I think one of the things in learning and development that you've taken me to in terms of thinking about my practice over however long it's been, in terms of that, when I've shared information with others, when I've had people on learning and development programs, learning and development qualifications to be learning and development practitioners and professionals, the theory bit is really important, but because it tends to be perceived as inaccessible, kind of some people glaze over and it gets put over there. It's too hard to get a head around. And I think if learning and development wants to become professional practitioners, this is part of our stuff we've got to get a head around. And what I like is the way you've, as Tom said, drawn some specifics out and like, look, here's a start with this. And if you're excited, there's more out there. But I think if we don't, if some people are new to this and they go away and don't use it, then you can't say you're an L&D professional. You work in the learning development space. You're not a professional, because you wouldn't expect a finance person to not understand financial ratios. You would not expect a purchasing manager to know purchasing law. So this is part of what we need to know.
Again, thank you, David. One of the things we probably need to also say is this is our model, not the model.
Yeah.
Not trying to take over anybody else's space.
Yeah.
We're not trying to be the chosen model, anything like that. This was simply me and Laura being at a conference going, me and Laura need an easier way to do things. And it just grew from there. And now it's become a product that we use with the clients it wasn't an intention to do that. And that's why we say it will always get better through its evolution and use. And it will always be somewhat transient. So most of the theories and the way we work are stable, but we're still open to influence by the new things we learn. We're not going to like hold with a stick fast here. We're not moving. So I want that to be known by people, is that we're not trying to capture somebody else's land, and we're not trying to say this is the only way. We had just then from Becky earlier talking about emotion. Where was emotion on the slides? And a really good question, and we have an answer to it. We're not ready to layer that layer on because we haven't done the research, but it's an important part of learning. And when we're ready for it, we'll add it. But yeah. Conscious it's 2:29 and people might need to leave. I'm happy to stay on if anybody wants to have a chat about anything else, but equally it's been lovely spending time with you. Nice seeing new faces, familiar faces, and a crossing of worlds. So we have Sport and Sport Northern Ireland there, or what was Simon Toole joining us, which might be a new space for him to come along, and seeing other worlds to join this space. But thank you, Tom, for allowing us in, and thank you, Laura, for supporting me through all of this, and thank you, Fiona, for getting us in the door.
Just quickly before we finish up, then, thank you so much for this. Hey, if people want to stay, they're more than welcome to. The recording will be available in the members area for Learning Network members in a couple of days' time. Being realistic, it might be later today. It depends how ambitious an afternoon I fancy. But most importantly, I'm a bit more shameless. You should absolutely go and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Be More Learning and Development. Search for it. It's great. There's already some awesome videos on there. And if you're not a member of the Learning Network, you should totally sign up for that as well. It's a fantastic group of people, incredibly supportive. I'm massively biased, obviously, but I mean, over the last kind of decade, it's totally shaped every stage of my career in learning and development, from help, how on earth do I start, to everything else I've done since. It's just a wonderful space to grow and learn from other people in the area.